Hey there, welcome to the Christian Bro Code YouTube channel. I'm your bro, Mario Escobedo, and I'm continuing this men's Bible study on the Gospel of Mark. Today we're looking at Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And here Jesus blows everybody's mind. I mean, they have no idea who this guy is and how he's able to do the stuff that he does. And he just blows everybody's mind when he heals a man. But before he heals a man, he does something that's just really extraordinary and no one's ever seen it before. So let's jump into Mark, pardon my voice, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Let me give you the summary. What's happening here is that Jesus returns to Capernaum. He had been preaching in some other towns. He returns to his home base of Capernaum. And as people find out that he's there, then they just swarm the house where he'd been staying. And so it gets to the point that no one can fit in the house and no one can even fit at the door. And so you've got these men who bring a paralytic man and they can't put him through the crowd. So what do? They make a hole in the roof and they lower him and put him right in front of Jesus. I find several things, a whole bunch of things interesting from this passage. Let me point out here in verse number 5, where he says, where Jesus says, when he sees this paralytic man and the fact that these men had lowered him down the roof, he says that, or Mark says, that Jesus saw their faith. Now, always when I had read the word there, I always thought it was the men who lowered the paralytic man. And I think that those men are part of there. But I also think it could be the paralytic man himself. We have no idea how it is that these men brought the paralytic man. This is what I mean. Did the paralytic man, did he know that Jesus was there and he said, hey guys, take me there? Or was it these four guys who were friends or family of the paralytic man and so they took him? We have no idea. But it says that Jesus saw their faith. And I think it means the faith of the paralytic man and whoever brought that paralytic man to Jesus. And so when he sees the paralytic man, you have to assume that these men brought him and that the reason that this paralytic man was there in front of Jesus is because he's looking for a healing. By this point, Jesus has done some healing. He's cast out some demons. So people know that he is a man who can do stuff, impossible stuff, hard stuff. They know that Jesus can do that stuff. So obviously they bring the paralytic man looking for a healing. What does Jesus do? He says, son, your sins are forgiven. Now that's nice, right? From the paralytic man's perspective, okay, kind of like, okay, the pastor blessed me or the priest blessed me. Son, your sins are forgiven. But that's not really what the paralytic man wanted. He wanted healing. And now this is where the story takes a different turn, and I think we begin to see the actual point of the story, because there were some scribes who were sitting there and they started questioning, why does this man speak like that? He's blaspheming. Only God can forgive sins. And one of the things I ask is that these scribes, what are they doing there listening to Jesus in the first place? Maybe by this point they hadn't built up any hatred or animosity towards Jesus, but if they hadn't yet, this would certainly make that happen. I mean, this would turn the tide, and the men would at this point begin to hate Jesus or begin to conspire against him because they're saying that he's blaspheming. So Jesus perceives in his spirit that they were questioning, and so that he asks this question to them. Very, very good question, right? He says, okay, what's easier for me to say? You're healed or you're forgiven? Which one is easier? And the answer, of course, that you're forgiven. That's what's easier to say. Why? Because you don't need any proof. I mean, there's no way to prove if somebody's sins are forgiven or not. There's no tangible evidence. So Jesus says, it's easier for me to say this than to say that. But so that you can see that I can do this, I'm going to do this. And this is what Jesus is saying. If by my word I can do this, meaning I can heal the man, that means that my word also has the power and the authority to forgive this man's sins. In essence, Jesus is validating what they're saying here without really validating it, because they said, only who can forgive sins but God? Only God can forgive sins. So in essence, Jesus is saying, I'm going to demonstrate to you without really explicitly doing it that I am God. And so what does he do? He says to the paralytic man, rise, take up your bed and walk. Where did he say that? Verse 11. So he says, rise, take up your bed and go home. So this validates that the man's sins are forgiven. Why? Because by the same word that he healed the man, he also has the authority to forgive the man's sins. Now, the question I've been asking throughout this series of the Gospel of Mark, this men's Bible study of the Gospel of Mark, is what can I learn from these different sections in Mark about being a disciple of Jesus? And I asked some questions about that. Did Jesus teach something about being a disciple? In this case, no, he didn't. Did somebody in the crowd do something that I can imitate as a disciple of Jesus? Possibly. The paralytic man, the other four men who brought him, I can imitate their faith. But the big question I always want to ask is, did Jesus do something in this section that I can imitate as his disciple? And in this particular case, I don't find an answer, a yes to that. And I tried. Like, I looked, and I was sincerely looking at, okay, what did Jesus do here that I as his disciple can imitate? And I found myself kind of trying to force the issue. Well, I can act with authority. Well, and it just, to me at least, it wasn't fitting. It wasn't working. Again, it seemed like I was trying to force the issue and make this passage talk about discipleship when it's not. What we have here is what I think we would call a Christological passage. What does that mean? It's a passage that demonstrates something about the person, the nature, the work of Jesus Christ. And it's not necessarily intended to teach us something about discipleship. Can we learn something about Jesus that can strengthen our discipleship? Absolutely. We can learn that we are serving the Son of God, God in the flesh, and that we have confidence to be his disciples because we're serving God himself. But as far as, did Jesus teach us something about being his disciples? Is there something that we imitate that Jesus did? You know, I tried and I looked, and I think I'd be forcing the issue in trying to make this a discipleship lesson from this particular passage. Now, to be sure, I'm of the opinion that everything that Jesus did, because his disciples were with him, everything he did was a lesson for his disciples. That's how he discipled them. He had them with him everywhere. But in this case, I think the lesson he's trying to teach them isn't so much a do as I do discipleship kind of lesson. It's more, here's who I am, here's who you're serving, pardon me, here's who you are following, the Son of God, the Son of Man, he uses that title, God himself. So, you know, again, I'm on this journey through the book of Mark to look for how to grow as a disciple of Jesus. And in this particular passage, I don't want to force the issue, but what I will emphasize is that Jesus demonstrates here his authority both to heal, but also to forgive sins, which is also an important lesson here, that Jesus first addressed, even though the physical need was very obvious, Jesus first went to the spiritual need, right? He said, your sins are forgiven. Before he healed them, he addressed this man's real need, his sinful nature, his sinful condition. And he addressed that before he went to the physical need that this man had. Maybe that's a point of discipleship that I can incorporate into my life, right? That as I encounter people who are going through physical difficulties, I need to address the spiritual need first. I'm going to think about that. I hadn't thought about that as I was doing my devotional, my personal Bible study on this. But maybe that can be the discipleship point for me. Imitate what Jesus did. I'm rethinking this. That may be the point here that I can take away. Again, it's not the main point of this passage, in my opinion, but it's a potential point as a disciple that, yeah, people are going to come and I'm going to encounter people with physical needs, material needs, but as a disciple of Jesus, I first address their spiritual needs because that really is the deeper, more important, more urgent need that they have. I'm going to chew on that for a little bit. I'd love to hear what you think about that. Again, I just thought about that right now. This is a live stream, by the way. If you're watching the recording or on the replay, I did this as a live stream, so this is just on the spot, right? But I think that's a good point for me to think about. Maybe that's the point of discipleship I can take away from this. All right, so hey, there are other videos in this series, the Gospel of Mark. Check them out, as well as some other stuff that I'm doing here on the Christian Bro Code YouTube channel. And as always, I produce a new episode of the Christian Bro Code podcast the first Monday of every month. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you very much for joining me. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. God bless, bro.